Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are strapping in for an essential and frankly a heavy lift.
Yeah, this is a big one. It's a topic that touches on so many different areas.
It really does. Our mission today is to analyze this seismic shift that's happening globally, the convergence of artificial intelligence, mass surveillance technologies, and of course, policing. We're synthesizing everything you shared to understand how we govern this rapidly evolving landscape. And most importantly, whether these new technological tools are building a safer future or if we're just, coding the biases of the past.
It truly is a deep dive into the very architecture of control. What stands out immediately, I think, across all the source material is that we are not just adopting new tools.
Right, it's not just a new gadget for the squad car.
Not at all.
Yeah.
We are fundamentally changing our societal approach to security. We are moving away from the traditional post-crime model, the classic investigative framework, where police react to a crime that has already occurred.
The CSI model, basically.
Exactly. And we're moving into what some sources term a pre-crime society.
Okay, let's unpack this. Moving from react to predict sounds efficient on paper. I mean, who wouldn't want to stop a crime before it happens?
Of course.
But what defines the shift to pre-crime? Is it simply about having better forecasting software, or does it represent a deeper institutional change?
It's absolutely deeper. The shift is driven by a mandate for preemption and disruption. The objective is not merely to catch criminals, but to identify and intervene in criminal activity before it happens.
And to do that, you need to know what's going to happen.
Precisely. This requires achieving what the sources call situational awareness through pervasive, unrelenting data collection. This awareness is then coupled with active mechanisms, often algorithmic, designed to control specific geographic spaces and even social cultures.
Human terrain, I think I saw that phrase.
Yeah, the human terrain. The goal is to prevent the possibility of an infraction before it can even materialize.
That sounds incredibly ambitious, almost. Almost utopian in its goal of perfect safety. But the tools enabling this ambition must be massive. We're talking about feeding these systems huge amounts of information.
Huge amounts. The acceleration of this shift is thanks to algorithmic surveillance and profiling systems running on big data.
Oh.
Now, it's important to note a caveat the sources raise.
Okay.
This isn't an absolute historical break. Societies have always had control mechanisms, but what big data and AI do is reconfigure and massively amplify these historical controls. It allows for a powerful fusion of broad mass surveillance with targeted, highly personalized surveillance, all running simultaneously.
And here's where the core tension of this entire deep dive emerges. AI promises incredible speed, efficiency, pattern detection, all the buzzwords. But if the state, the policing apparatus, is automating decisions about people's lives based on these patterns, if it's deciding who is a threat, where they might offend, or who should be watched, the potential for massive ethical, legal, and constitutional crises just explodes.
That is the central governance challenge. Automation inherently introduces problems of opaqueness and accountability. I mean, think about it. If your rights are infringed or you are subjected to excessive scrutiny, how do you challenge a decision when the system that made it is a proprietary, non-transparent mechanism?
When you can't see the code.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When the underlying logic is hidden, the rule of law really struggles to keep up.
So we need to find out if there's a reliable off-ramp or at least some guardrails. To do that, we've structured this discussion into 3 investigations. First, the shaky, often biased data foundation these systems are built upon.
Dirty data.
The dirty data. Second, how regulators, specifically in the US and the EU, are trying to draw clear legal and ethical lines. And finally, the non-technological alternatives that might offer genuinely effective paths to community safety.
A huge agenda.
It is. So let's start with that essential but unstable foundation. Predictive policing, or PP. At its simplest, these are AI systems designed to predict, usually by time, location, or individual, who is at highest risk of criminal activity.
And here is the critical point, the one thing you have to remember through all of this. To make those predictions, these systems rely overwhelmingly on historical police data.
Okay.
This is where the profound problem begins, what one source aptly calls the dirty data trap. If the system is built on decades of historical police records generated by human officers, it inherently risks embedding the legacies of unlawful, structurally biased, or even outright corrupt policing practices directly into the logical core of the algorithm.
Wow. The idea that the mistakes or even the malice of the past are literally being coded into the future is It's staggering. I mean, we always talked about AI being a reflection of its training data, but in this case, the training data is the record of systemic failure.
It is.
So what exactly counts as dirty data? Is it just typos and reports?
Oh, it goes much, much deeper. There are several layers of contamination ranging from, technical errors to outright malfeasance.
Yeah.
The most egregious form is data that has been intentionally manipulated.
Manipulated how?
Sometimes it's referred to as juked data. Consider instances like NYPD officers falsifying records to meet departmental quotas for arrests or stops.
The old CompStat pressures.
Exactly. Or cases where officers actively downgraded reported serious crimes like classifying an assault as harassment to artificially keep official serious crime statistics low.
That's fascinating and incredibly important. That manipulation isn't just bureaucratic, it's driven by institutional pressures. It's painting a false picture of public safety success. But the data created by that lie then becomes the truth for the algorithm.
It becomes gospel for the machine. When the algorithm ingests those records, it sees those downgraded incidents as less severe, or it sees the areas targeted for quota-driven stops as genuine crime hotspots, even if the stops themselves were unlawful.
And I imagine there are other categories too.
Absolutely. A second category of dirty data includes records generated from outright false arrests or cases where evidence was planted on innocent people. These incidents, no matter how rare you might think they are, still create a record of criminal activity that contaminates the entire database.
And then there's the third, subtler contamination, stemming from inherent human and societal biases.
Which is perhaps the largest volume of contamination. We're talking about data generated from biased calls for service false or prejudiced claims of criminal activity in 911 calls, often targeting minority populations in specific neighborhoods.
So even if the police show up and find nothing, a record was still created.
A record was created. The incident report still enters the raw data stream. So when a system is trained on records generated by decades of corrupt, racially biased, or constitutionally illegal policing practices, it can only perpetuate those outcomes.
Let's look at how specific jurisdictions demonstrate this risk. Let's start with Chicago and their strategic subject list, the SSL.
Right, the SSL. This is a controversial risk-scoring tool used by the Chicago Police Department, the CPD, to identify individuals they deemed highly likely to be involved in future gun violence, either as a victim or a perpetrator.
I remember this being in the news. It was very controversial.
Extremely. And even as the system faced intense public scrutiny, and while the CPD was actively undergoing federal court negotiations for a consent decree due to pattern and practice violations, they doubled down on data. The CPD contracted with the University of Chicago Crime Lab to develop even more advanced data-driven strategies using predictive analytics and these controversial SSL scores.
Now, here's where the critique found the failure. Was there any institutional mechanism put in place to clean the data before feeding it into the new, more sophisticated models?
That's the key question. And the forces confirmed there was no evidence that this new initiative was designed to account for, much less cleanse, the data generated by the decades of unlawful and biased practices the department was already being scrutinized for.
So think about the implications of that. They were essentially building a brand new, powerful predictive engine on a foundation they knew was faulty.
A foundation known to be riddled with systemic bias, particularly targeting young men of color. They were optimizing the delivery mechanism of an already corrupt system.
New York City offers a different, but equally troubling, case study in transparency with their Patternisal program.
Yes, Patternizer. It's a pattern recognition program used by the NYPD. And what's astonishing here is the lack of public disclosure.
Yeah.
The NYPD utilized this tool for 3 years, starting in 2016, before they even publicly admitted its existence.
3 years. And what does it do?
The program uses machine learning to identify similarities between reported crimes, essentially automating a task previously done manually by crime analysts.
And what were the risks flagged by critics regarding its operation?
Well, studies on Patternizer suggested that because it relies on existing crime classifications and locations, it inherently risks compounding implicit biases already present in initial reporting and police response patterns.
So it just doubles down on existing assumptions.
It can, yeah.
Yeah.
And the ultimate risk is profound. That these automated pattern matches could lead to misallocations of resources or, worse, the unjust incarceration of innocent people. This danger was serious enough that the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination flagged the issue, which drew international attention to the potential for systemic racial discrimination fueled by this lack of transparency.
And we also saw examples of departments using these systems even while operating under strict federal oversight due to proven systemic bias. That seemed like the definition of ignoring the core problem.
It is the ultimate collision of technological ambition and institutional failure. Take New Orleans and Maricopa County, Arizona. Both use predictive policing tools like Palantir or PredPol while operating under federal court-monitored settlements or consent decrees.
So they were already in trouble with the federal government for biased policing.
It's exactly. In New Orleans, the police department had been investigated by the Department of Justice twice due to systemic pattern and practice violations. And in Maricopa County, the sheriff's office, under former Sheriff Joe Arpaio, was notorious for discriminatory policing.
Right, I think everyone remembers that.
Precisely. They were found to have engaged in discriminatory policing against Latino residents, including unlawful stops and arrests between 2007 and 2011. And the data showed that even after a consent decree was put in place, from 2014 to 2017, racially biased stops and arrests of Black and Latino residents continued.
So they built predictive systems trained on data that reflected the exact racial disparities the federal courts had mandated they eliminate.
That's the bottom line. The institutional failure here is that the technological implementation completely ignored the legal and moral requirements of the consent decree. It's like trying to build a new house on a toxic waste dump without cleaning it first.
And this feeds us directly into the concept of the confirmation feedback loop. This isn't just a coding error, it's a systemic driver of inequality.
It is. It's the mechanism by which the dirty data guarantees its own persistence. Here's how it works. An algorithm trained on historically biased data identifies a marginalized neighborhood as a hotspot for future crime.
Okay.
So police presence and contact in that area increase dramatically based on the prediction. This increased scrutiny, however, inherently generates more arrests for low-level disorder, more traffic stops, and more incident reports.
Simply because there are more officers there to see things?
Exactly. They're there to observe and record interactions. So if you increase the scrutiny by 100%, you get a 100% increase in recorded incidents, regardless of whether the actual rate of serious crime has changed at all.
Right. And those new reports then get fed back into the system.
They get fed back into the algorithm as the verified ground truth of crime. The system sees the increased number of recorded incidents and thinks, aha, my prediction was correct. This area is indeed a high crime zone.
Which perpetually justifies the initial prediction and reinforces the cycle of over-policing in that exact area. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy written in code.
Perfectly said.
It creates an artificial crisis. The technology essentially reinforces negative perceptions, making communities that are already socioeconomically vulnerable appear, based on the data, even more problematic than they are in reality. This must have political consequences.
Absolutely. That reinforcement loop influences public policy directly. Officials can cite the system's data, the hotspot map, to justify supporting punitive policing strategies or policies aimed at micromanaging or even pushing out these misperceived communities.
Gentrification, for example.
It's sometimes linked to processes of gentrification, yeah.
Yeah.
The political desire for technological efficiency becomes a justification for policies that are ultimately harmful to long-term residents.
And the final layer of this problem is that we can't hold the technology fully accountable because of the non-transparency crisis, the famous black box problem.
This is the wall accountability hits. Few, if any, predictive policing vendors are transparent about how their algorithms operate, the specific data sets used to train them, or what internal accountability measures exist to flag potential inaccuracy or misconduct.
Why the intense secrecy? I mean, if they are solving crime, shouldn't they be proud to share their methodology?
Well, there are a couple of key reasons. First, the technical reason. The algorithms themselves are proprietary trade secrets.
Intellectual property.
Exactly. Companies invest vast sums in developing these machine learning models. They view their source code as their IP and naturally want to protect that investment from competitors. Secondly, the nature of machine learning itself means that the AI often detects patterns in ways that are simply not evident or easily explainable to humans, even the data scientists who built it. The model is so complex that it essentially operates as a black box.
So you have systems that cannot truly reason about the specific context of a human case, feeding on biased data, operating in a way that is difficult for its creators to fully explain.
And shielded from public scrutiny by trade secrecy. It's the ultimate accountability crisis. The difficulty in obtaining proprietary data and source code limits public oversight and scrutiny, even for powerful legal entities.
So if a police department relies on an algorithm to justify a raid or a resource allocation, and a defense lawyer can't access the underlying logic.
How can the justice system function fairly? It can't. The lack of transparency fundamentally undermines due process.
Given the deep systemic issues inherent in using past police data to predict the future, the pushback has been swift. We see the most aggressive regulation happening not in Washington, D.C., but at the local level, specifically targeting biometric surveillance.
Yes, the fight over facial recognition technology, FRT, has become a major flashpoint. Local communities are saying if the federal government won't act, we will, and they're taking highly aggressive, proactive measures.
The examples from Portland, Oregon are striking. They didn't just target police use.
That's right. Portland, Oregon took one of the strictest stances in the entire country. They banned FRT use not only for government agencies, including the police, but also for private organizations within the city limits.
Private organizations, too, so private business can't use it for security.
Not within Portland. This reflected a significant institutional and public mistrust of both law enforcement application and the major technology companies providing these tools. They decided that pervasive, automated facial identification was fundamentally incompatible with the city's desired level of privacy.
That's a unique move, regulating the private sector's use of a technology usually viewed as a law enforcement tool. What about Portland, Maine? They focus their limits on the police.
Cortland, Maine, on the opposite coast, also drastically limited police use of FRT. And crucially, they went a step further in creating tangible accountability. They authorized civil penalties up to $1,000 for citizens who are subjected to a police facial recognition scan that violates the local ban. This shows that local government is actively creating financial disincentives for misuse, putting some real teeth into the regulation.
Okay, now we need to look at another pervasive surveillance tool. Automated license plate readers, ALPRs. The arguments here are completely different because the technology providers are actively defending their use as constitutionally sound.
That's where the material from the technology providers offers a powerful counter-perspective. They frame ALPRs as a traditional investigative aid, a targeted tool used to find missing persons, recover stolen vehicles, or identify vehicles linked to violent crimes based on existing evidence.
So not a dragnet, but a scalpel.
That's the argument. Their core argument is that these devices are intentionally designed to operate within constitutional boundaries, specifically the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable searches.
Help us understand the Fourth Amendment defense. When we think of surveillance, we often think of the mosaic theory, the idea that even if individual data points are public, collecting enough of them over time reveals an intimate, protected profile of a person's life. How do ALPRs manage that concern?
They argue that ALPRs satisfy the Fourth Amendment requirements through careful design and limitations. First, they argue ALPRs create only discrete, point-in-time observations.
A single snapshot.
Exactly. Think of it like a fixed-speed camera. It takes a still image of a vehicle at a fixed location and a specific time. They are not generating a continuous tracking record or a diary of a person's life, which is the concern raised by the mosaic theory.
So the data is time and space bounded.
Precisely. To address the mosaic theory directly, some systems, like the ones detailed in the sources, impose a standard 30-day retention limit on the data they collect.
Only 30 days.
Yes. This strict data hygiene prevents the accumulation of long-term dossiers, which is the mechanism courts have worried about. The data is meant to be a snapshot, useful only for immediate active investigations, not for compiling historical biographies.
And the second key defense centers on what they're actually observing.
That's vital. License plates are government-issued identifiers explicitly designed to be publicly visible for roadway safety and enforcement purposes. They argue that ALPRs observe vehicles, not people.
Right.
From a single fixed location image, you cannot know who was driving, who the passengers were, or what they did before or after that specific observation. Courts have roundly agreed that observing this publicly visible information with fixed location cameras does not violate the Fourth Amendment because there is no reasonable expectation of privacy in a license plate displayed in public.
They also stress that the implementation process itself should be democratic and transparent.
Yes, the focus is on public safety by design. They argue that ALPRs are typically adopted through democratic governance, such as city council actions, not by police fiat. Furthermore, they actively encourage agencies to implement transparent auditing mechanisms and public portals where citizens can see how and why the technology is being used. This commitment to process, they argue, maintains community trust and legitimacy.
Shifting away from visual surveillance, we're seeing states react to the practical use of generative AI in police report writing. This raises concerns not about bias, but about accuracy and accountability.
Right. The speed and volume at which Gen AI can produce text reports, summarizing interviews, aggregating evidence introduces massive integrity concerns.
You just tell it to write the report and it spits it out.
Pretty much. And Utah was one of the first states to enact a law, S-180, that directly addresses this. The law requires any law enforcement record created wholly or partially by generative AI to include a clear disclaimer stating that it was AI-assisted.
And what's the accountability mechanism built into that law? Is it just a label?
No, crucially, the law requires the human author, the officer, to personally certify that they have read and reviewed the entire report for accuracy. This is a clear legislative attempt to impose the human-in-the-loop, HITL requirement we'll discuss later.
So the human is still on the hook.
The human remains the ultimate responsible party for the factual correctness of the report, even if the AI did the bulk of the drafting.
I wonder, though, and this is my critical challenge, if speed is the goal, isn't it naive to think humans will ever fully review every single AI-generated report? Doesn't this Utah law risk creating a rubber stamp process rather than genuine human oversight?
That is the perfect question to raise. It's the central problem. The intent of the law is solid, to establish the locus of responsibility. But the operational reality, especially in a high-volume police environment, could certainly lead to officers feeling pressured to certify accuracy without due diligence.
You just click certify and move on to the next one?
Exactly. It puts the onus on the individual officer to check machine, and whether they have the time or the skepticism to do so is questionable. This trend, seen also in California, shows legislatures are racing to regulate AI use in government. But the enforcement of genuine human review is the next great hurdle.
If U.S. regulation is piecemeal, a city banning FRT here, a state regulating AI text there, the European Union has attempted to create a comprehensive, continent-wide standard with the EU AI Act. This is globally significant, setting up potential international norms for how AI can be governed.
It is truly historic because it operates on a strict, risk-based framework. It doesn't treat all AI the same. The most critical provisions, those banning AI systems deemed to pose unacceptable risks, have an early compliance deadline set for February 2nd, 2025.
So very soon.
Very soon. And these are the systems the EU considers fundamentally incompatible with democratic principles and fundamental human rights.
So this is a complete prohibition on specific categories of technology, no exceptions, right? They're drawing a line in the sand about what AI can and cannot do in a free society.
Exactly. Article 5 details these specific prohibitions, which are designed to protect fundamental rights, privacy, safety, equality, and fairness. They looked at potential dystopian applications and decided to ban them before they became institutionalized.
So what are the absolute bans we need to be aware of?
There are 4 key prohibitions relevant to governance and policing. First, AI used for social scoring.
Ah, the social credit system.
Exactly. This is where the government or a business assesses an individual's trustworthiness or behavior based on mass data collection and then uses that score to grant or deny access to services, jobs, or rights. They banned the technological architecture of a true social credit system.
That immediately addresses concerns about systems like those seen in China. What's the second ban?
Second, they banned systems designed to manipulate or exploit individuals by targeting specific vulnerabilities based on their age, disability, or socioeconomic situation. Third, they banned inferring individuals' emotions in the workplace or education institutions.
Inferring emotions, that's a significant restriction on effective computing technologies, which are constantly growing in sophistication. Why target the workplace and education specifically?
Because those are environments where an individual is under pressure and may feel coerced. The potential for systems to generate emotional assessments, which are notoriously unreliable and culturally subjective, and then have those assessments used to influence job performance reviews or educational opportunities, was deemed an unacceptable risk to human dignity and fairness.
And the fourth prohibition is highly relevant to surveillance and the dirty data problem we discussed earlier.
Yes, the Act bans the untargeted scraping of the Internet or closed-circuit TV, CCTV, for facial images, specifically when the purpose is to build up or expand face recognition databases.
So they're stopping the data collection at the source.
They are proactively attacking the mass collection of biometric data used to train the surveillance systems themselves, aiming to starve the biometric data aggregation industry.
But the real legislative drama, the most contentious prohibition that took the longest to resolve in negotiations, was the regulation of biometric identification in public spaces.
That is the real-time biometric identification, RBI, battleground, covered in Article 5.1. The EU recognized that while this technology is powerful, its indiscriminate use fundamentally alters the nature of public space.
It eliminates anonymity.
It does. Therefore, the general rule is a prohibition on using real-time biometric identification, think live facial recognition, feeds in publicly accessible spaces for law enforcement purposes.
No, in all these high-risk scenarios, law enforcement always argues they need some limited exceptions for terrorism, for finding missing children, etc. Did the EU grant any exceptions?
They did, but the bar is almost impossibly high. Real-time RBI is only allowed in specific limited security-related cases, such as counterterrorism, searching for missing persons, or preventing a concrete, substantial, and imminent threat to life. And crucially, even when permitted, these exceptions are subject to mandatory safeguards that limit their scope dramatically.
Tell me about those safeguards. What are the strict conditions police must meet to deploy real-time RBI in public?
They impose 3 interlocking conditions. First, the use must be strictly limited in 3 dimensions: time, geographic scope, and purpose. It must be targeted only to identifying specific individuals within a defined group. For example, a list of known terror suspects.
So no dragnet surveillance. It has to be surgically targeted. You can't just scan a whole crowd.
Absolutely not. Generalized or indiscriminate scanning of the public is prohibited. The second condition is the process hurdle. It requires prior authorization from a judicial or an independent administrative authority,
A judge has to sign off.
a judge or an impartial rights body. And to ensure genuine independence and prevent internal pressure, prosecutors are explicitly excluded from granting this authorization.
That's a huge institutional check. It means no police chief or prosecutor can simply greenlight a massive surveillance operation in a city square. It requires independent judicial review.
Exactly. And third, the authorizing authority must complete a comprehensive fundamental rights impact assessment before approval is granted. This requires considering the entire spectrum of human rights implications.
And what about the output? Can the police just act on what the machine says?
No. This is critical. The final output of the RBI system cannot be the sole basis for a consequential decision. Decisions producing legal or similar effects may not be based solely on RBI output. Human verification is always required. This ensures the human remains the ultimate bearer of responsibility, even when using permitted high-risk systems.
It's clear that regulation, whether through local bans or comprehensive acts like the EU's, is converging on the idea that technology must be accountable, transparent, and built to protect rights. This shifts the conversation from just banning things to actively designing for trust.
And a key document here is the Ethically Aligned Design Framework. This isn't regulation imposed by government. It's a comprehensive vision created by technologists and engineers themselves, urging that human well-being be the priority when designing autonomous and intelligent systems, or AIs.
So this is the industry trying to regulate itself, in a way. What are the foundational philosophical principles of this framework?
They emphasize deep respect for humanity. They insist that AIs must be designed and operated to respect and fulfill human rights, freedoms, and dignity. They must also be verifiably safe and secure throughout their operational life, ensuring they don't unexpectedly malfunction or become compromised. And fundamentally, if an AIS causes harm, it must always be possible to discover the root cause. That's the traceability requirement.
Let's break down the core pillars they outline for governance, starting with transparency, Principle 4. This directly tackles that black box problem we keep coming back to.
Right. Transparency means it must be possible to discover how and why a system arrived at a particular decision. It covers traceability, explicability, and interpretability. For systems used by state authorities like police or government agencies, governments and lawyers must have reasonable access to all generated data and information. The rule of law cannot function if one side is shielded by trade secrets.
So it's about much more than a public relations statement. It's about building a system that logs its work for later legal scrutiny.
Precisely. These systems must be designed to generate audit trails, recording the underlying facts and the logical rules that supported the decision. These trails must be amenable to third-party verification. The logic and rules embedded in the system have to be subject to rigorous testing and risk assessments. While companies can protect their intellectual property, the inputs, the process, and the outcomes must be available for inspection by legally responsible parties.
The second pillar is accountability, Principle 3. How do they define this beyond just, assigning blame?
Accountability requires that designers, manufacturers, owners, and operators must all bear responsibility for the system's performance and harms. Legal frameworks must clarify culpability and ensure that liability doesn't just evaporate when an AI is involved.
So you can't just say the algorithm did it.
You can't. And furthermore, the framework suggests governments should adopt regulations requiring financial guarantees, like mandatory insurance or reserve funds, so that victims can actually recover damages when AIs causes harm.
That's a powerful idea. It moves accountability beyond just naming the responsible party to ensuring restitution is possible. It forces a financial reckoning for risk.
It creates a powerful market incentive for safety. And linking transparency and accountability is the critical operational principle, human in the loop, HITL.
HITL seems to be the one consistent regulatory request across the world, from the EU AI Act to that Utah generative AI law.
It is the ethical firewall. AI systems should be collaborative tools, not autonomous decision makers. The human element is essential because only humans can handle moral, legal, or ethical judgments, understand full context-sensitive decisions, or deal with novel edge cases that fall completely outside the model's learned behavior.
So the AI finds the pattern, but the human applies the judgment.
That's the ideal.
What does genuine HITL oversight look like in a practical policing context?
It involves active, continuous oversight. It's not just a person clicking approve. It means reviewing and validating model outputs in real time, correcting errors, and providing continuous feedback to tune the model. It also means actively ensuring that the system operates within legal and ethical boundaries, with the human prepared to overrule the machine's suggestion when context demands it.
The question then becomes whether people actually trust the machine suggestions, even when a human provides the final sign-off. We have a UK study on public perception that gives us some interesting data here.
Yes. The study found that people generally view a decision as less fair and less appropriate when it is made by an algorithm compared to when it is made by a human police officer. This phenomenon is known as algorithm aversion.
So we're naturally suspicious of the machine.
We inherently trust the human element more, despite knowing that humans are also flawed.
Was that aversion consistent across all types of policing scenarios, or did context matter?
Context mattered significantly. The aversion was much stronger in area-based scenarios. For example, using an algorithm to allocate police resources to a specific crime hotspot, thereby increasing surveillance on an entire community.
Ah, okay.
It was much stronger there compared to individual scenarios, like using an algorithm to decide whether an officer should conduct a stop and search on one person.
That suggests that people are most skeptical of algorithmic fairness when it comes to decisions that affect community-wide resource allocation, perhaps suspecting that the underlying historical bias is directing resources unfairly.
Exactly. That skepticism is well-founded, given the inherent flaws we discussed in the training data. The problem of data and system bias is pervasive, and it emerges across the entire life cycle of an AI.
Give me some non-policing examples of how bias creeps in.
Oh, there are many. Biases can emerge in pure perception systems. Think about an AI rejecting an Asian man's passport photo because the system insisted his eyes were closed, or speech recognition systems being significantly less accurate for female speakers because they were primarily trained on male voices.
And when those biases transition into high-stakes decisions, the consequences are severe.
Absolutely. The most concerning examples are in criminal justice, where systems like criminal risk assessment tools were found to systematically overpredict recidivism rates for African Americans compared to white counterparts. The IE framework is emphatic. AI systems may show operational biases that disadvantage specific groups, reinforcing stereotypes if engineers do not sufficiently integrate ethics, cultural sensitivity, and rigorous independent testing into the design process.
So, if the algorithmic state is struggling to govern itself, if it continuously risks reinforcing historical bias through dirty data, and if the public inherently mistrusts its decisions, it compels us to step back. We need to look at alternative, non-technological approaches to safety. The final section of our deep dive shifts focus entirely from prediction and algorithmic control to prevention through community strength.
This is about recognizing that genuine, sustainable safety should not rely on optimizing surveillance. It relies on optimizing human relationships. We need to look at the power of social capital, the shared networks, norms, and trust structures within a community.
The bonds between people.
Exactly. And research consistently shows a direct, powerful link between high social capital and significantly reduced criminality at both the individual and community levels.
How does that social infrastructure actually translate into fewer crimes? What's the mechanism?
It works on multiple levels. When social bonds are strong, They foster trust and connection, which creates a shared environment of positive social norms. This cohesive setting shapes personal morality and mitigates the impact of trauma linked to offending behavior. A community that is unified, cohesive, and expects positive behavior becomes a powerful, immediate, and informal control mechanism.
So people step in before the police are ever needed.
Often, yes. The intervention happens before formal police contact is ever necessary.
That community willingness to step up, that's what academics call collective efficacy, right?
That's the formal term for the concept. Collective efficacy is the practical, action-oriented side of social capital. The willingness of neighborhood residents to intervene for the common good and realize informal social control. It's the difference between seeing a neighbor's kid doing something wrong and looking away.
Versus stepping in because you know the family and you share responsibility for the youth in your street.
Exactly. You feel that shared responsibility.
We have some fascinating longitudinal studies here that really define the relationship between disorder and this efficacy. It sounds like a psychological feedback loop, but on a neighborhood scale?
It is, and the findings are crucial. Longitudinal studies like the ones tracking North Carolina neighborhoods over time found that high levels of perceived disorder.
What does that mean, disorder?
Things like abandoned cars, graffiti, loud noise, panhandling, visible signs of neglect or chaos. These things strongly predicted lower levels of collective efficacy and cohesion at the next time point.
That makes intuitive sense. Visible, physical, and social decay demoralizes the community. If you feel like no one cares and no one is stepping up, you are less willing to step up yourself.
Exactly. It confirms that collective efficacy perceptions are constantly being shaped and updated based on the immediate social environment. If the neighborhood looks like chaos, the community believes intervention is futile.
But the research also seems to differentiate between cohesion and efficacy. Are they interchangeable in terms of fighting crime?
No, they are distinct, and this is a key finding. Cohesion, the social ties and trust among neighbors, is the precondition for collective efficacy. You must trust your neighbors before you are willing to act with them.
You have to feel like you're on the same team.
For sure. Furthermore, the research shows that it is cohesion, the generalized trust, that is the primary factor explaining lower perceived crime the following year, even more so than the measure of collective efficacy itself. We can think of it this way. Trust is the operating system for community safety. The ability to intervene collectively is just the application that runs on it. If the OS is buggy, the app won't launch.
This highlights the profound vulnerability of police departments relying on predictive technology when they haven't cultivated that underlying community trust. If the police are seen as an occupying force, the community's capacity to govern itself informally just collapses.
That's the fundamental breakdown. And this is where the nature of police interaction is critical. Studies show that when police emphasize normative values, meaning fair procedures, respectful treatment, and procedural justice, they generate far more citizen interest in collaborating on crime prevention.
Than just saying, we catch bad guys.
Far more than when they simply emphasize effective crime fighting, what they call an instrumental strategy.
So, how police act and how they treat people matters more than their clearance rate or how many arrests they make when it comes to long-term community partnership.
It matters deeply because it directly influences the neighborhood's capacity for self-governance. Perceptions of police procedural injustice, being treated unfairly or disrespectfully, directly influence a neighborhood's capacity for informal social control.
Which explains a lot.
It helps explain why neighborhoods with larger race-ethnic minority populations often have lower capacities for informal social control. If they perceive the formal police system as unjust or biased, they are less willing or able to step up and enforce positive social norms themselves. The police's failure to act justly, actively, undermines the community's own safety structure.
So the most effective policies are not purely technological, nor are they purely social. They must be multidimensional, combining environment, relationships, and justice.
Absolutely. The research suggests that effective strategies must combine environmental design, known as community-engaged crime prevention, through environmental design, or CEPD, with the foundational work of strengthening social capital and collective efficacy.
Tell me more about CEPD. What does that involve besides just putting up lights?
CEPD is a comprehensive approach. It focuses on how the physical environment shapes behavior. This includes guiding or blocking access through strategic fencing or pathways, supporting legitimate use of public space through things like park seating, lighting, and programmed activities.
Making public spaces feel lived in and safe.
Exactly. And encouraging natural surveillance designing spaces so people can see and monitor their surroundings easily. It's about building environments that signal this place is cared for and people are watching, thereby encouraging social norms and discouraging disorder, which, as we noted, is a predictor of efficacy loss. It's a holistic approach that recognizes the complex interplay between physical space, community relationships, and individual morality.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, analyzing sources that range from global legislative standards to the intimate dynamics of neighborhood trust. It's been a powerful look at the competing visions for security in the 21st century.
The essential tension for you listening to take away is this. We are rapidly shifting towards algorithmic governance, but that governance is currently being built largely on unstable, biased historical data, the dirty data trap. This shift poses a fundamental threat to constitutional rights, fairness, and crucially, community trust.
But this isn't a foregone conclusion. Regulatory frameworks are rapidly emerging. We have the stringent top-down approach of the EU AI Act, which explicitly bans dystopian practices like social scoring and sets a near-impossible bar for biometric use. And we have the technical standards put forth by organizations like the IEEE, which insist on hardwired principles of transparency, accountability, and the non-negotiable necessity of the human in the loop.
The sources compel us to maintain critical scrutiny of algorithmic governance. The real problem with predictive policing is not that the technology exists. It's the application, the oversight, and the failure to assess that technology against the highest standards of justice, rather than just chasing efficiency. Technology must be utilized in the pursuit of justice, guided by evidence and the will of the people, not as an end in itself.
Which returns us to the alternative, human-centric pathways. We've seen that true community safety and police legitimacy are deeply intertwined with the quality of human relationships. Social capital, cohesion, and procedural justice. These concepts are messy, relational, and demand time, but they build resilient communities.
So here's the final provocative thought for you to carry forward. We're witnessing a profound political desire for modernization and efficiency using AI and predictive technology. How can we ensure that this drive for technological speed doesn't inadvertently displace or, even worse, actively undermine the vital human-led work of cultivating collective efficacy and trust?
A huge question.
Especially when the algorithms are demonstrably struggling to look past the biases of the past, how do we make the political choice to prioritize genuine human-led community bonds over the promise of flawless statistical prediction? The future of justice, it seems, may depend far less on the sophistication of our models and far more on the strength of our connections.
That's a truly powerful note to leave on. Thank you for navigating this complex landscape with us. We'll see you on the next deep dive.